The moment that changed my life didn't look like a mistake. It looked like a smart decision. That's why it took me so long to understand what I had done. I chose the safe option. The reasonable one. The version of my life that came with explanations instead of questions. At the time, it felt like maturity, like I was finally doing what adults are supposed to do. I didn't leap. I calculated. I remember sitting quietly, weighing outcomes the way you're taught to. Pros and cons, risks and guarantees. What I could lose versus what I could keep. One path felt uncertain, exposed, alive in a way that scared me. The other felt stable, controlled, defensible. I chose the one I could justify. Everyone agreed with me. That mattered more than I admitted. People said I was smart, responsible, grounded. They said I was making the right move, that I was protecting my future. I nodded. I believed them. For a while, everything worked. My life settled into something predictable. Days had structure. Decisions had logic. I knew what was expected of me, and I delivered. Nothing fell apart. Nothing went wrong. That's the part no one warns you about. Sometimes the most dangerous choices are the ones that work. I didn't feel immediate regret. I felt relief. Relief that I didn't have to explain myself. Relief that I didn't have to risk looking foolish. Relief that I had chosen something solid. Safety felt like success. I told myself that wanting more was childish. That excitement fades. That passion is unreliable. I repeated those ideas until they sounded like truths instead of defenses. Over time, I stopped thinking about the other path. Not consciously. I just stopped visiting it. Life moved forward. Promotions. Responsibilities. Routines that filled the day without ever asking who I was becoming. I was busy enough not to notice the absence of something I had never named. I told myself this was what stability feels like. But stability has weight. And slowly, I started to feel it pressing down. I noticed it in the mornings, when I woke up already tired, not physically, but internally. In the evenings, when the day ended exactly where it began. In conversations where I spoke confidently but felt oddly detached from my own words. I wasn't unhappy. That made it harder. Unhappiness would have justified doubt. Pain would have demanded attention. What I felt was neutrality, a smooth, quiet middle ground where nothing was wrong enough to fix. My life was safe enough to endure. Endure became the metric. I measured my days by how smoothly they passed, not by how deeply I felt them. I avoided disruptions. I avoided questions that didn't have clean answers. I avoided imagining alternatives because alternatives implied that something essential had been left behind. I started to realize that I rarely felt anticipation anymore. Not excitement, anticipation. The sense that something ahead might matter to me personally. Everything ahead felt like a continuation. I began to understand that safety had slowly turned into confinement. Not because my life was bad, but because it was closed. I had chosen a path with guardrails on both sides. It kept me from falling and from wandering. One morning, standing at a crosswalk, watching the light turn green with no cars passing, a thought crossed my mind without warning. When did I stop crossing toward what I wanted? That thought unsettled me. Because I couldn't remember. I realized that the decision I had made years ago hadn't just shaped my circumstances. It had shaped my identity. I had become someone who chooses safety first. Someone who avoids uncertainty. Someone who values correctness over curiosity. That identity earned me stability. It also cost me something I couldn't yet name. I started to sense that my life was built around protecting myself from loss rather than allowing myself to experience anything that mattered deeply. The safe life didn't demand courage. It demanded compliance. and I had complied so thoroughly that I forgot there had ever been another version of me, one who was willing to risk being wrong in exchange for being alive. I didn't ruin my life that day. I secured it. And years later, I'm only beginning to understand the price of that security. Because safety doesn't ask who you are. It only asks that you don't move too far from where you already stand. After I chose the safe life, I became very good at defending it. Not out loud internally. Whenever a quiet discomfort surfaced, I had an explanation ready. Whenever a doubt appeared, I reframed it as ingratitude. Whenever a memory of the other path tried to return, I told myself I had outgrown that version of myself. Outgrown is a convenient word. It sounds like progress even when it's avoidance. I learned how to fill my days efficiently. Meetings, responsibilities, routines that stacked neatly on top of one another. There was always something to do, something to maintain, something that required my attention. Busyness became my proof that I was moving forward. But I wasn't moving anywhere new. I noticed how rarely I felt surprised by my own life. Everything unfolded exactly as expected. Even challenges felt familiar, manageable, predictable, contained. I had built a life where nothing could truly shake me. At first, that felt like strength. Later, it started to feel like numbness. I realized that I hadn't made a single decision in years that scared me in a meaningful way. I avoided fear not because I was wise, but because fear threatened the image of control I had worked so hard to build. Control was my reward for choosing safety. I told myself that control meant freedom. But control also meant limitation. I started to see how often I dismissed opportunities simply because they didn't fit into my existing structure. Invitations that felt slightly inconvenient. Ideas that didn't guarantee outcomes. Conversations that might have led somewhere unpredictable. I called those distractions. In truth, they were openings. And I kept closing them. I told myself I was protecting what I had built. That risking stability for something uncertain would be irresponsible. That I had already invested too much to turn back now. That argument worked for a long time. Until I noticed something unsettling. I wasn't afraid of losing what I had. I was afraid of discovering that what I had wasn't enough. That fear kept me loyal to the safe life long after it stopped feeling alive. I began to feel a strange kind of grief, not for something I lost, but for something I never allowed myself to try. A grief without a clear object, which made it easy to ignore and impossible to resolve. I felt it when I saw people choose paths that didn't make sense on paper but lit something up inside them. I felt it when I heard stories of risk, failure, reinvention. I told myself I wasn't jealous. But I was. Not of their outcomes. Of their permission. They had allowed themselves to choose something without knowing where it would lead. I hadn't. I had demanded certainty before action. And certainty never arrived. I noticed how much of my life was built around maintenance. Maintaining relationships. Maintaining status. Maintaining a version of myself that looked composed and settled. Maintenance kept things intact. It didn't make them meaningful. I began to feel tired in a way rest didn't fix. Not exhausted, disengaged. Like my inner life had gone quiet from lack of use. I stopped expecting moments to move me. I stopped believing that something ahead might change how I felt. My future felt like a continuation of my present, and my present felt closed. That realization scared me more than uncertainty ever had. Because uncertainty implies possibility. This felt final. I started asking myself questions I had avoided for years. What did I actually want when I made that choice? Was I choosing safety or avoiding fear? Who would I be if I allowed myself to risk being wrong? Those questions didn't bring answers. They brought discomfort. And I had built my entire life around minimizing discomfort. I saw how deeply that instinct ran. How quickly I sought reassurance. How reflexively I dismissed anything that threatened the narrative of having things under control. I realized that safety had become my identity. Not a strategy, a definition. I was the one who didn't rock the boat. The one who didn't chase illusions. The one who made the smart choice. Letting go of that identity felt dangerous. Because if I wasn't that person, who was I? I imagined what it would mean to choose differently now. Not dramatically, just honestly. To admit that the safe life had costs I hadn't been willing to acknowledge. The idea made my chest tighten. Not because it was impossible. Because it would expose the years I had spent convincing myself that safety and fulfillment were the same thing. I didn't want to face that. I told myself it was too late to change course, that reinvention was for people who had failed, not for people who had succeeded quietly. But the truth was harder. I hadn't failed. I had settled. And settling, when it happens slowly enough, disguises itself as contentment. I realized how often I had used logic to silence longing. How easily I dismissed that quiet pull towards something more alive as impractical or immature. I had treated desire like a liability. Something to manage. Something to outgrow. Now, desire felt like a ghost. Still present but distant. I began to understand that the safe life hadn't stolen my dreams. I had negotiated them away. Piece by piece. Choice by choice. Until one day, I looked at my life and realized that while nothing was wrong, something essential was missing. And the worst part was this: I knew exactly when I had traded it. I just hadn't known the cost at the time. The realization didn't push me into action right away. It sat with me. Heavy. Patient. Impossible to argue with. I kept living the safe life, going through the same motions, maintaining the same structures, but something had fundamentally changed. I could no longer pretend I didn't know what I had chosen. Every routine now felt deliberate. Every repeated day felt like a decision renewed. And that was unbearable. I had always believed that regret comes from bad choices. From recklessness. From mistakes you can point to and say, that was wrong. What I learned instead was this: regret can come from doing everything right. From choosing safety so consistently that you never find out who you could have been without it. I wasn't angry at myself. I was disappointed. Disappointed that I had demanded guarantees from life before I was willing to participate in it. Disappointed that I had treated uncertainty as a threat instead of a condition of being alive. I had told myself that caution was wisdom. But wisdom without courage is just fear that learned how to speak politely. I realized how much I had postponed my own aliveness. How often I had said, later, without ever deciding when later would be. How easily I had accepted a life that felt manageable instead of meaningful. I hadn't lost my dreams in one moment. I had downsized them. I made them reasonable. Achievable. Safe. Until they barely resembled desire at all. That was the grief I finally allowed myself to feel. Not for what I failed to do, but for what I never let myself want fully. I began to understand that the safe life doesn't break you. It numbs you. It replaces urgency with comfort. Curiosity with maintenance. Possibility with repetition. And repetition, when it goes unexamined, turns into permanence. I stopped asking myself whether it was too late. That question was another form of avoidance. Instead, I asked something harder: if nothing changes, can I live with the life I've chosen knowing what I know now? The answer came quietly. No. Not because the life was bad. Because it wasn't mine enough. I didn't quit everything overnight. I didn't blow up my world. I didn't announce a dramatic reinvention. The shift was internal before it was external. I allowed myself to care again even when caring felt foolish. I allowed myself to feel the pull toward things that didn't make sense yet. I allowed myself to be uncertain without immediately neutralizing it. Those moments felt uncomfortable. They also felt real. For the first time in years, my choices started to feel personal instead of correct. Not all of them were good. Some led nowhere. Some failed quietly. And for the first time, failure didn't feel like a threat. It felt like proof of participation. I learned something essential: a safe life protects you from falling. It also keeps you from flying. And flying doesn't mean success. It means movement. It means risk. It means choosing without knowing how it will turn out. I don't pretend that choosing differently guarantees happiness. It doesn't. But it guarantees honesty. And honesty, I discovered, is heavier than safety, but it's also grounding. My life is less predictable now. Less defensible. Less easy to explain to people who value stability above all else. But when I wake up, I feel a tension that wasn't there before. Not anxiety. Attention. Attention to my own reactions. To what excites me. To what scares me. To what feels true even when it's inconvenient. I stopped measuring my life by how secure it looked. I started measuring it by how present I felt inside it. Presence is not comfortable. It requires you to accept that there are no guarantees. That meaning doesn't arrive as a reward for being careful. That sometimes the only way to know what matters is to risk choosing it. I didn't choose the safe life because I was weak. I chose it because I was afraid to want something without permission. Now, I'm learning to live without that permission. Slowly. Imperfectly. Without applause. If you're listening to this and you recognize that quiet unease, that sense that you played it safe and still feel like something slipped through your fingers, I want you to hear this clearly: you are not broken for wanting more. You are not irresponsible for questioning safety. And you are not ungrateful for noticing what comfort cannot give you. Safety is a foundation. It is not a destination. I didn't ruin my life by choosing the safe path. But I almost let my life pass by because I never questioned it. Now, I choose differently, not because I know where I'm going, but because I refuse to keep standing still just because it feels secure. My life may never look perfect. But it finally feels lived. And after years of mistaking safety for success, that uncertain, vulnerable, undeniably alive, is the only outcome that truly matters to me now.